First, I want to apologize for being your lesson today. I know we're supposed to be doing other things. But I want to share with you guys a very personal experience, something that happened to me about 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago to this day. I want to first show you a video clip.
Standing on the street looking up, saying out loud, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. You shoot first and you ask questions later. I'm looking up and bodies are falling from the sky, and your brain can't keep up with the reality that's in front of your eyes. You just can't quite imagine that it's really happening. They had set up a makeshift triage right under the Millennium Hotel, right across the street from the World Trade Center on Church Street. And that's where they were bringing the injured. There were very little injured. It was an incident where, people either lived or died. At some point, you felt the earth sort of shaking, almost like an earthquake. And I didn't know what was happening at that moment because my back happened to be turned towards the buildings at that moment. And you felt this sort of rumbling. And as I turned around, there was this mushroom cloud torpedoing down the street. And my instinct was to run. Normally, my instinct would be to shoot. But for the first time in my life, my instinct was to run. Because if I didn't run, I knew I would be dead. So I was running away from this mushroom cloud and ran into a pharmacy. I maneuvered my way through the back of the pharmacy and wound up in the lobby of a building on Ann Street and Broadway. And I knew that I had to go out there. I didn't know what had happened. I just knew whatever happened out there, I had to go and photograph it. So I was wandering around just at the foot of City Hall, and I will never forget this image. I'm running away from Lower Manhattan, turning back, and just seeing these clouds of smoke billowing everywhere. And my heart was breaking with every step, thinking, this is my city. The very next morning, first thing in the morning, I got myself down to Battery Park City and worked myself up to a rooftop. I found a rooftop to photograph from, and it was an incredible vantage point. And this is the West Side Highway, completely covered with the World Trade Center debris. And the next frame was actually the front page of the Daily News on September 13th. And it's of firemen bringing a body out of the rubble. For months and months and months after the attacks, I photographed firefighter funerals. And they would come right from ground zero in their work clothes, and they would come to funerals, and reeking of World Trade Center debris. But everybody showed up. Everybody was there for each other. It was just incredible. My obligation as a journalist, as a photojournalist, was never as strong as it was during that time. I felt such an obligation to our readers, to the city, to the country, to document what had happened there. Shortly after, I wondered how the event would change me, what effect it would have on me. And I always thought, in time, I'll understand how I've changed from it. And 10 years have gone by, and I'm waiting for the epiphany, and it still hasn't come. I just think it's become part of my life experience, part of who I am today. I've always been a proud New Yorker. I'm an even more proud New Yorker. I've always been a committed journalist. I'm even a more committed journalist. Maybe it's cemented all of my beliefs about everything that I already felt.
Defining moments. All right? I want you guys to remember that term. defining moments. Just want you to remember that. 10 years ago, I woke up in the morning like I always did. I'm getting ready to go to work. And I lived in Brooklyn, right about here in New York. My son was about 1, and like I did every morning, I kissed him and said goodbye. I said goodbye to my wife. And I got onto the subway. Now, when you ride the subway in New York City early in the morning, it's kind of like, stand up, this. All right, and everyone in the subway, you kind of just look straight ahead. Even though you're standing like this, you pretend like you're not standing like this. You pretend like the person next to you isn't there, and you look straight ahead. You smell everything about that person. You see everything about that person. You have a unique relationship with the people on the subway. Because my train had to go through Lower Manhattan, I was on the train with a lot of businessmen and women, all right, with suits and briefcases. And, you know, I did this every morning. Didn't think anything of it. The same way when you guys wake up in the morning and you go out to the bus stop and you get on the bus, or you get into the car and you drive on the way here. There's certain people who you see every single day, but you don't really think about seeing them every day. You know, they're just people that kind of just flash in front of your eyes. So I got on the train, rode all the way up. I taught in a place called Washington Heights, which is north of Harlem, right up here in this area. So I had a long subway ride every morning, like more than an hour of, you just saw, of this, okay, all the way up. And I got off the train and I walked to my school. Now, I told you guys already earlier in the year about a little bit about my old school in New York. All the kids there were from the neighborhood. It was a neighborhood school, not like Piedmont, a magnet school where kids come from all over. Everyone that went to my school lived in the neighborhood. It was a cool school too. If you looked out the window of my classroom, you would see the old Yankee Stadium. Like, my students would look out of the back window and Yankee Stadium was right over here in the Bronx. So it was a really cool place. And I loved teaching there. I loved teaching there. I loved the students. All of my students were predominantly Dominican or African American. A lot of them were first and second generation immigrants. So school was very important to them. All right? The people there valued an education because they understood what an education would do for them. So I got to school. That morning, my students woke up early, and a lot of them didn't see their parents when they woke up, because a lot of their parents woke up a couple hours before them to travel all the way downtown to work at the World Trade Center or to work in other areas around here. Not with the business suits and the briefcases, not my students' parents. They went there to wash windows. They went there to pick up trash. They went there to do a lot of the manual labor. So a lot of my students, they didn't see their parents in the morning because their parents were already gone before they woke up. So maybe the night before, you know, their parents kissed them goodnight. Maybe the night before, they didn't do their homework and their parents were mad at them. Maybe the night before, they were really disrespectful to their parents, you know, and they had that bad vibe with their parents. But it was a normal morning. It was a normal morning. They didn't see their parents, but they got up and did their regular routine and they walked to school because all of my students lived within walking distance. So it was, I'll say 9 something, maybe 8 something. It was really early. It was like the first period class. And when I tell you I can remember this like it was yesterday, I can. I'm standing in the front of the room like I am now. And over the loudspeaker, you know how Ms. Gardner always goes over the loudspeaker and interrupts class? My principal said, "Good morning. It's a beautiful day outside. Teachers, please close your windows, turn off any communication devices that you may have." You know, my students kind of looked at me and I looked at them. You know, and they said, "Cat?" Because they, you know, Spanish speaking. "Cat?" I don't know what this is about. So I just ignored it. You know how some of you ignore some of the announcements? You know, I just ignored it, and I went on with my lesson. My desk was back in that corner right next to the door. At my school, remember if I told you guys, people weren't in the hallway between classes because it was too dangerous, because gangs would try to come into our school and recruit and do things like that. So you rarely heard any voices in the hallway between classes. All of a sudden, a teacher, he had a British accent. He had a British accent. He said, "They're bombing us. They're bombing us." I heard him yell, "They're bombing us." And he was running up and down the hallway. He said, "They're bombing us." And I opened the door and I looked out, because when he said they're bombing us, I thought maybe it was a gang, because we had Bloods and Crips and Latin Kings. I thought it was a gang, you know, doing something against the school. Because I told you guys, I used to have to physically fight to keep the gangs out of the school. We would, you know, there were several times where the faculty would have to fight the gangs. And so I thought it was some sort of war going on with the gangs. So he's running up and down the hall. "They're bombing us, they're bombing us." And I kind of looked out and saw him, and I closed the door, and I just thought, you know, what's my next move? Not too long after that, the principal directed all of the 7th grade classes to go to the gym. We were all supposed to go into the gym. So we walked into the gym, and at that point, I keep my phone on vibrate. I know they're all supposed to be off, but I kept mine on vibrate back then. My phone vibrated, but I didn't answer it because I thought that we were getting ready to have a gang war. So I took all my kids into the gym, and we're sitting there, and then all of the teachers started to gather around each other. And then the stories started happening. A lot of lies, because no one really knew exactly what was going on. I didn't know that a plane had hit the World Trade Center or a plane had crashed. I didn't know any of this. All I heard was, you know, there's some sort of battle, there's some sort of a fight that's happening. I just knew it was some sort of fight. I would say within 5 minutes, frantic parents came running into the gym, screaming, "Where's my baby? Where's my baby?" but in Spanish. "Where's my baby? Where's my child?" Grabbing their kids. Now, I want you guys to imagine if that happened. All right, what you would be thinking if you see parents running in, grabbing their kids and leaving, and it wasn't your parent who came and grabbed you. All right, it was other people's parents grabbing them. Obviously, you would start to panic a little bit. You would wonder, you know, why are, and it wasn't just one, it was many. Why are these parents grabbing their kids and running out? And if a parent is coming in and grabbing their kid, no one is coming in and grabbing me. You know, what's going to happen to me? I asked the teacher to kind of cover me, and I stepped outside, and I went and got on my phone. And I called my wife, who was in Brooklyn, and I said, "What happened?" She said, and it was funny because she used the "they," just like that teacher did before, the "they." They crashed a plane into the World Trade Center. And they think they have more. And then the phone went out. What? I really didn't understand the message, but I knew, because as I'm standing outside, parents are running to the school. Like, there's people running to the school. So I knew I better get back in to the building. At that point, for all the teachers, and I want to really stress this, all the teachers at the school, something kind of clicked in. Something clicked in where we decided we were going to take care of every child in that building. And you guys need to understand how important that is. Teachers are people too, whether you believe it or not. And we have families. Every teacher in that school decided that this was their family. The people in the building, they wanted to make sure the people in the building were taken care of. So we kind of had an unspoken pact that we wanted to make sure every child either got home or every child was in a home before we would worry about our own homes and our own families. That wasn't really spoken. And the principal didn't have to say it. It was kind of just understood. So I waited, and the other teachers waited in the gym. Now at this point, our students are crying because they don't know what's happening. The adults start to understand what is happening. I started to understand who they were and what they meant. But for the story, it's not important who they are and what they meant. It's not important. The kids started to get frantic. They started to get really nervous. And when that happens, it's the adult's responsibility to try to calm the child. But what can I say? What could I say? I'll tell you what I said. Well, I'll tell you what I did. I lied. I lied. I told them that everything's fine. Everything's fine. Don't worry. Everything's fine. I lied. I looked my students in the face and I lied. Guys have to be patient. I don't like lying to my students. Told myself I wasn't gonna cry. But I lied on that day to all my kids. As I was waiting, parents were getting their kids, but as time passed, some kids didn't get picked up. I want you to think about that for a second. Some kids didn't get picked up. Some kids woke up that morning and didn't see their parents. They spoke to their parents the night before. Some kids had arguments with their parents the night before. Some kids had something negative with their parents the night before. And they never saw or spoke to their parents again. After it started to get a little later, and it wasn't too late, and now back when I think about it, this was only maybe a few hours later, we decided to start walking the kids home around the neighborhood. And like I told you, it was a neighborhood school, so it was all kind of in this area. We walked the kids home. Some kids, when we knocked on the door, got there was no one home, obviously. And it was a tight-knit community. The Dominican community there, they were very tight-knit. So if we didn't take them to their home, there was a relative or there was a family friend who we can take them to. And every kid before I dropped them off asked me if everything was okay. And I lied. I told them they'll see their parents later. I told them their parents had a hard time getting back uptown because of the trains and everything. I lied. I lied. So now, all my kids are dropped off. All my kids are dropped off. Now my focus changes. My focus changes. Now I'm thinking about my son. My son was 1 at the time. I went to the subway stations. As you can see all the trains here, I usually take the red line to get home. They wouldn't let me in the station. They told me, and it was one of the first times, and it happened recently that they shut down the subways in New York because of the hurricane. But it was one of the first times that they completely shut down the subways in New York City. So now I'm stuck. I really don't know what's happening, and I can't get home to my family. So I walked. Started walking. I started walking all the way downtown. Here's when the story gets kind of crazy. As I'm walking, I'm learning the story of what happened on 9/11 from what I see, from what I smell, from what I hear. Around this area, I came across a lot of people who weren't down here when it happened, but who saw it on TV and knew everything that happened. They were looking for friends, they were looking for relatives, they were looking for people who they knew. And they were running up and they were, I had people run up and touch me and kind of shake me and ask me if I knew this person or if I know of that person, this and that. And I really, I didn't have much to tell them. But the more that happened to me, the more panicked I became. The more I wanted to get home. So I kept walking. When I got around this area, around near 34th Street or so, the people looked different. The people looked different. It was one of the first times in my life that everybody was the same color. Everyone was the same color. The color was black, gray, or red. Everyone was black, gray, or red. They were black, gray, or red because either they were covered with the debris of the World Trade Center, they were covered with burnt, it looked like, and we kind of saw the image before, like burnt, it looked like burnt paper on them, or it was red from blood on their clothes, or actually blood on their skin. But I kept going. I had to keep going because I had to get across the bridges. There's bridges down here that you have to cross over to get into Brooklyn. I had to keep going. But the more I'm walking, the more I start thinking about life. I start thinking about life. I start thinking how from this point on, my life will never be the same. My life will never be the same. The security that I felt living in New York City, living on the East Coast, living in America, I will never feel that again. I will never feel that again. I felt like someone took something away from me. The same way you feel when you go home and you lay down in your bed and then your pillow was there and like your pillow feels so good. I felt like that was taken away from me. I kept walking. I told all of you I went to Pace University. My campus was about 2 or 3 blocks away from the World Trade Center. So as I got closer to downtown, that was a place that felt comforting to me. It felt, I wanted to go there and feel better. But when I got to the doors, they wouldn't let me in. They wouldn't let me in because they were trying to get everyone out of downtown Manhattan. Another thing that kind of struck me on that day, all the people who were going away from this area, everyone who was running away from this area, except fools like me, but I had a reason, had to get home, and firefighters and police officers. Later on, I thought about it. The firefighters and police officers that I saw already knew what was down here and what had happened. They already knew that people that they had worked with were dead. They already knew. But yet they were going. And then it made me think. I kind of, changing topics here. It made me think. When all this first happened, when the plane first struck that building, firefighters and police officers went to the crash site. People were running out of the building. People were trying to get away. Firefighters and police officers were going to the crash site. I really want you to think about that. As people were being evacuated and running down the steps, firefighters and police officers were running up the stairs. Now, when the second plane hit, the firefighters and police officers knew what was going on. It was an attack. The firefighters and police officers still went up the stairs when people were running away. They ran up the stairs. The first tower collapsed. Firefighters and police officers were trying to save people in the other building. They were still going up the stairs. They knew their fate. They knew their fate. We throw around a couple words very casually. The words courage. They use it a lot in sports. Being brave doesn't belong in sports. Being a soldier doesn't belong in sports. Courage and bravery belong to the people who see their fate in front of them and they don't run from their fate. They decided it was more important for them to help others than to save themselves. It's an image that stays in my mind. So I get to Pace University, and the Brooklyn Bridge is right next to Pace University. So I start crossing the Brooklyn Bridge. And I turn as I'm going across, and I look back at Lower Manhattan. It's a beautiful picture, if anyone's ever seen this. It's a beautiful scene that I've seen many times, because I used to have to run the bridge when I played basketball every morning. Every morning I had to run that bridge. I turn back and look, and the vision that I had once known, if you look at those pictures in the middle, the vision that I had once known would never be anymore. Those towers were gone. They were just gone. They just weren't there. There used to be two huge towers that represented the city of New York. And all you could see is dust and debris flying up in the air. They were just gone. And I'm walking across the bridge and I look back and I see that. And then that thought hits me again. My life will never be the same. I'll never feel the same way again. So I don't waste a lot of time. All right, so I get across the bridge and I finally get home. There was good and bad to that. There was good and bad to that. I was very happy that I was back with my family, but now I had to sit down and I had to watch on TV what had just happened. Because I saw downtown, I saw the aftermath of it. I saw what happened after, but now I had to watch what I had just seen. Well, what had happened before. And I kind of lost it inside. I kind of lost it inside. You guys know Mr. Milligan's like this manly man. I kind of lost it. I kind of lost it. I later found out that one of my teammates from college died in the first building, I think. The building that got hit by the first plane. I'm not really going to go and talk about him, but I will tell you what I wish. I wish his name was Terrence. I wish Terrence was sitting at his desk and the window to the World Trade Center was right next, the window looking out was right next to him. And I wish the plane came right in and smashed him. I wish the plane came in and smashed him to bits. Exploded his whole body. You might think, why would you think that's horrible? I think that's less horrible than what hundreds of people had to do on that day. They had to decide how they were going to die. People who I rode the train with that morning, people who I stood next to on the subway, at the point where I was in my classroom teaching, they were standing on the edge of a building, way up in the air, and they had to say to themselves, this is the end of my life. I need to decide, am I going to burn or am I going to jump? They had to make that decision. When I was instructing, when I was talking about active reading strategies and text types, the people who I rode in with that morning had to decide how they were going to die. Some of them made last phone calls to their families. Some of them held hands. And they were brave enough to take control of their own life. They were brave enough to jump. They were brave enough to burn. They were brave enough to choke. I only hope that Terrence didn't have to deal with any of that. I hope Terrence didn't see the plane. I hope Terrence had no idea what happened to him. The same way we are standing and we're sitting in this room right now, I hope his life ended like that. I hope, if it was us, I hope we all died like that. Just boom, it was over. Because if he had to think about what was happening to him, that would eat me up inside. It would eat me up inside. I told you guys about a defining moment when we first started. In my life, I've had 3 defining moments. When my dad died when I was 10, when my son was born, and on 9/11. From that day on, little things have never bothered me anymore. Little things never bother me. Some people ask me, why I seem always to be so just relaxed and so calm. Whenever I feel a feeling of not being relaxed and calm, I think about what I saw on that day. What nerve would I have to complain about anything in my life after some people stood on an edge of a building and knew that their life would be over within 30 seconds and made the decision one way or the other? And I'm going to complain about the petty things that are going on with me? It was a defining moment in my life. What did I learn? I learned that when I look at you, everybody in here of all different ethnicities, I know that there is really no difference between any of us. Because in New York City, in the days that followed, the whole city came together. There was no racism. It was about survival. We had fighter jets flying over our city for days. Not fighter jets at an air show, fighter jets ready to shoot something down. Flying over our city for days. Everybody came together. The same way the teachers in our school came together. We went back to school. Not too many days later, we went back to school. You would think the attendance would have been really, really bad. I can't recall one kid that didn't show up. And you might be wondering, wow, if I lost a parent or if I lost a loved one, I wouldn't go to school. We were all they had. School was all they had. They knew that if they came to school, they would eat. They knew if they came to school, they would get a hug. They knew that if they came to school, there was someone there to talk to them. That school year, I wasn't a teacher. I was a counselor. I was a social worker. I was everything probably except a teacher about, instruction. I say all of that to say this. please, please, please tell people that you love. Tell them you love them. Tell them you love them. Don't let little insignificant things ruin you and destroy you. Because in the grand scheme of things, they're probably not that important. And when you see a police officer or a firefighter, understand that they would risk their life for you. Understand that they would risk their life for you. I always tell my students, thank you for listening, because me being able to talk about it, I've talked about it every year since it's happened, it helps me. It's counseling for me. It makes me feel better. Please, though, never forget what happened on that day. And when I say what happened on that day, I'm not talking about the political stuff. I'm not talking about what country did what to us or what group of people did what to us. Never forget all the people whose lives were affected on that day. Never forget the police officers and the firefighters who risked their lives. Never forget my teammate who hopefully sat about right here and got smashed and blown up by the plane rather than having to jump or rather than having to burn to death or choke to death. Never forget 9/11. Never forget 9/11. Do you guys have any questions?
Did they ever rebuild the Twin Towers?
They are building a memorial that will be finished soon. They're building something called a Freedom Tower, which is one tower. I recently took my son back earlier this year, and it's under construction, but it's going to be a beautiful memorial, and it's going to be just one tower.
Does your wife still have any memories about what happened?
Yeah, her memories were different because she saw it all on TV, and everyone in New York, we didn't know what was going to happen next. You know, as I was walking across the Brooklyn Bridge, I didn't know if the bridge was going to explode. She didn't know if something was going to happen in Brooklyn. Like that day you really thought, you know, your life was in jeopardy, like something was going to happen to your life. But my wife lost a lot of close people. I'm not going to say a lot. She lost some people that were close to her. Not only was I teaching, but I used to work at a gym in Brooklyn, and a lot of the guys that I worked with worked down in that area around the World Trade Center, and some of them didn't make it. So there were a lot of people that I personally knew that didn't make it. You guys have any questions? Yes.
How long did it take you to walk from?
It's funny that you say that. A lot of people have asked me that. I don't know. It was dark when I got home. It was dark. And I think as I was walking, like sometimes when you walk, you know, you look at your watch and things. I never remember looking at my watch to see what time it was. The whole day in itself, the hours kind of get jumbled up in my mind. But I had to have been walking pretty fast to make it home. There may have even been some times where I was running. But exactly how long it took me, I don't know.
Did you see any people jump from the building?
The
Or
buildings
choke?
were already down
Oh.
by the time I made it to downtown Manhattan. Like, it had already happened. All the horrible things happened when I was still way uptown. But like I said, as I was walking downtown, the levels of people that I saw were the people who were affected. There were a number of people who I saw who saw people jump, and you can see in their eyes that they had seen probably the worst thing that they had ever seen in their life. Like, their reactions in their faces told the story. And when I got around my old university, there were some people who I knew around there, and then they kind of relayed what they saw. For example, another one of my teammates, he was chased by that big cloud of dust going through Manhattan. He was chased, and he started to run across the Brooklyn Bridge. And then, after that building fell, he went back. Like, he started walking back. And people were standing around watching people jump out of the other tower. And then when that tower fell, he said he ran again. Like, the same thing happened to him again. So there were a lot of people who ran and went back, and then they had to run again. And the people that went back, they saw, they saw people jump.
Where was your son?
He was 1, so he was at home with my wife.
What was the absolute worst thing that you saw or heard during Halloween?
I'll tell you the worst thing. It's nothing I saw or nothing I heard. It's the smell. And I still have that smell in my nose. Like, I'm going to tell you all the story in language arts later on this year. It's the dead body story. But it's not about 9/11, it's about something else. But this smell was different. This smell wasn't just of a rotting corpse. This was a smell of burning metal, burning airplanes, and I hate to say it, but burning bodies. And that smell lingered around downtown Manhattan for a long time. And even now, it's funny, every now and then something will happen and the smell, you know, I'll get the smell again. But I'm not upset that that happens because it grounds me. You know, it's tough being a teacher. And sometimes, you know, you get frantic, you get frazzled, and, you know, stuff like that happens, the smell happens, and it always grounds me. It always brings me back to reality.
Did you go to work the next day?
It was like a couple days later. It really, in my mind, it feels like we went back to work right away and we saw the kids right away. But it was probably a few days that went by before they started school because the subways, they didn't want to run the subways because they didn't know if there was going to be a bomb down there. So it must have been just like a few days later. But like I said, all the kids came to school. Everybody came to school, and it was, you know, we took care of each other. We took care of each other.
Did you walk anywhere near the towers?
Yeah, I went, walking down Manhattan, my school, like I said, was about 2 blocks away. That's about as close as I got, about 2 blocks away. But when the buildings fell, the debris was all over. So even where I was, I could see everything. And when I finally got to Brooklyn, I went to a place called the Promenade, where you can stand and you can look at Manhattan. You know, what it looked like to me was when you see those wars on TV, like a war zone. New York City and America, it was a war zone in America. Like, and it's unreal because you don't picture that, you know, in our country.
Is there like a video of when the planes did hit the Twin Towers?
Absolutely. There's a lot of video. I could have shown you guys a lot of different clips. But it would have taken away from my point. My point is to appreciate the people that love you and appreciate the people that try to help you. I wouldn't recommend any of you seeing that because I don't want that to be your memory of 9/11. I would love for this to be your memory of 9/11. All right, to just never forget and never forget those people. Not necessarily all the bad stuff about it. I know I told you guys a lot of the bad stuff, and I only did that because you guys were too young to actually, you know, experience it.
Do you know if they shut the school down that you taught in?
You mean now or then?
Like, is it shut down now?
No, it's still. Whenever I go back to New York, I always go back and visit. And it's funny, a lot of those kids you see in those middle pictures, my students from New York. And by the way, I told you guys, those pictures, I used to take my students to the top of the World Trade Center every year. That was one of our field trips. We'd always take a field trip to the top. And that's the picture you take when you get to the top. Most of those kids I'm in contact with on my personal Facebook page. I know some of you have contacted me on my teacher Facebook page. I like to stay in contact with, once my student, always my student. Once you're my student, you're always my student. And those kids still talk to me today. They still seek guidance through me. Some of them have graduated from college already and they're in careers and they have their own families and things like that. There's one kid over there who passed away a few years, and it's kind of symbolic that the third Twin Tower picture, the first Twin Tower picture from the bottom, the kid who was right in the middle of the two towers passed away not too long after that. And I think I told you guys this before, losing a student is horrible. I hope I never have to deal with that again, but yeah. Some of them had to go back to the Dominican Republic because that's where their families were. I had one student where it was just her and her mom died that day, and so she had to go live with her family. Some stayed with friends for a while. But here's the funny thing about life. Life moves on. Life continues. I told you guys about my dad. When my dad passed away, it was a defining moment in my life. But I moved on. I continued. And those students, they've continued. Yes.
Did you have to like step over any dead bodies or anything?
The funny thing about, not the funny thing, but there were very few bodies left. Most of the bodies disintegrated. Most of the bodies ended up as dust and a few bones. There weren't a lot of bodies recovered, complete bodies. I don't know, I sometimes think about the people who were alive, the same way we're alive and just, standing right here. And they were alive when the planes hit because they were on the floors above and they had to ride the building down. Like they died when the building crashed to the ground. They didn't die when the planes hit. They were okay. They were okay until the building fell. Sometimes I think about what that might have been like. I'm sure it happened like this, but I'm sure as it was happening, they say that, your life goes, flashes before your eyes. It's kind of, it takes the energy out of me sometimes thinking about that day and all the different things I can think about. I'll never forget. I'll never forget. Last question.
Were there any other buildings destroyed?
Yeah, around the World Trade. First of all, the World Trade Center, it's not just the 2 Twin Towers. The World Trade Center is an area. So they have like World Trade Center 1, World Trade Center 2, 3, like there are a bunch of different buildings. And there were a lot of buildings around that destroyed. As I'm sure you guys know, the Pentagon was hit. I think you guys are we're gonna see that when we go on our field trip. Is that part of it?
It's probably.
We're gonna see that on the field trip. And there was another plane that went down in Pennsylvania. And again, we're talking about heroes and we're talking about courage. I'm not gonna get into that, but if you wanna research about that plane that went down in Pennsylvania, forget about football and basketball players and athletes. The courage of the people on that plane who decided that they were going to fight for their lives and that they were going to sacrifice their life so that plane didn't run into the Capitol building or into the White House, that's courage. That's for the boys in the room. That's being a man. That's being a man. Willing to, you're sacrificing yourself for your country and for, all these other people. I can't even begin to talk about how I feel about those people.
How many planes came down? Like
3.
4, including the one.
Oh, 4, I'm sorry, 4. But they believe that there were a lot of other planes that would have been hijacked if they hadn't shut down, like our country shut down all planes, like all planes were grounded. And they think that there would have been many more planes on that day. And that's when I told you about how I don't feel comfortable or safe anymore. I don't feel comfortable in my own country anymore. I used to. Trust me, you guys, when you used to go to the airports, you didn't have to take off your shoes. We used to didn't take off our shoes. We would just walk right in, walk through this machine. You would put something on the conveyor belt. You didn't have to take anything out of your bag. You'd stick it on the conveyor belt, it'd go through, and you just walk through. That's what life used to be like. I know that you guys don't know life any different than the way it is now. Life is different now since 9/11. Life is different. The way people look at our country is different. But I'm not going to get into the political stuff. Really have to be the last one.
How did the people in the plane that landed in Pennsylvania know that there were planes being bombed?
The hijackers told them that they were taking over the plane. Like the hijackers got on the little thing and said what was happening. And then the guys a few guys got together and they decided that they weren't going out like that. They decided that they were going to storm the cockpit and they were going to take the plane over. And they were successful. They weren't able to fully control the plane or fully take over to fly the plane. But when the cockpit was being attacked, the hijackers just pitted the plane right to the ground. So I don't know. Oh no, I think I heard that some of them heard on the phone. Did they hear on the phone that the Twin Towers were hit? Mm-hmm. So they did know that there was an attack happening. And then they realized that they were part of the attack.
Yeah, these like
Yeah. So again, I thank you guys for listening. Hug your parents. Hug your parents when you go home. Tell them you love them. If you see a police officer, you see a firefighter, tell them thank you. Okay? This weekend, they're going to show a lot of clips about what happened in 9/11. The people that you know, make sure they never forget. Make sure they never forget. Make sure 9/11 doesn't become a joke for people. All right? Because you guys, I've shared with you the experience, so now hopefully you guys feel as if you've experienced it. Pay it forward. Pay that forward. Okay? Share that. All right, Ms. Whitey, class. Keep the stools
Keep the
there.
stools here. And keep the stools here, and we're quiet.